print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Julian Wong, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Saturday/Sunday, July 18th to 19th, 2026 issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Lettuce crisis deals big blow to Taco Bell's winning streak. Fast food chains have struggled for years to win back consumers fatigued with rising prices and unexciting menus. And then there's Taco Bell. The comb of the Crunchwrap Supreme and Cheesy Gordita Crunch has kept on finding ways to grow, rolling out new offerings like Diablo Dusted Crispy Chicken Nuggets and Mountain Dew Baja Blast Pie, helping it outpace competitors in U.S. sales growth for at least 6 years. A microscopic parasite now threatens Taco Bell's hot streak, potentially imperiling millions of dollars in sales and setting up a slog to win back consumers. Yum Brands, the chain's parent company, could have to contend with a standout brand not delivering the consistent sales growth that has powered its overall revenue and profit. We see risk that concerns about Taco Bell food safety could pose a measurable headwind, Baird restaurant analysts said Friday, particularly if consumers connect the problem more to the chain than its supplier. Federal health officials said Thursday the outbreak of cyclopsoriasis was linked to shredded iceberg lettuce served at Taco Bell locations in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. They said more than 1,600 people who became ill in the outbreak reported eating at Taco Bell locations in those states. Taco Bell said it had voluntarily removed potentially affected lettuce in select states. Yum Brands shares have fallen around 9.5% during the past 5 trading days, and Taco Bell's Instagram feed, which typically posts vibrant images of its sauce packets and Baja Blast drinks at the beach, has gone quiet. The chain earlier this month pulled some fresh ingredients from regional menus in what it called a proactive move, which raised alarm bells among some consumers. Taco Bell's business has slowed as the outbreak picked up steam, according to third-party data providers. Placer.ai, which analyzes foot traffic at businesses, estimated that visits to U.S. Taco Bell locations were 2.3% higher than the day-of-week average on July 7th. But by July 11th, they were 5.8% lower. The chain's United States sales grew 4.2% for the week ended July 11th, representing the slowest weekly increase since April, said data firm Consumer Edge, which analyzes credit and debit transaction activity. Marissa Brown, a 30-year-old mother of 2 from Watertown, New York, considers herself a Taco Bell regular, ordering Crunchwrap Supremes and cinnamon twists for herself and her family. Brown said she plans to scale back her Taco Bell runs, at least for a couple of weeks. Maybe I'll give some of our local shops a try in the meantime, she said. An Ohio man on Thursday sued a large Taco Bell franchisee, alleging he fell ill and tested positive for cyclospora after eating Taco Bell food in late June. Pacific Bells, the Washington-based operator that runs the Ohio restaurant, referred inquiries to Taco Bell. Yum needs Taco Bell's strong run to continue, particularly now that its stable of brands is set to shrink. The company struck a deal last month to sell its Pizza Hut chain to a private equity firm after a long string of weak sales. Taco Bell currently represents more than a fourth of system-wide sales for Yum, which also operates KFC and Habit Burger and Grill. Yum executives have frequently referred to Taco Bell as a category of one brand without comparison, and it represented around 38% of the company's operating profit before the Pizza Hut sale. Fast food chains have struggled to increase sales for years as consumers, navigating rising prices, have reconsidered how they spend on food. McDonald's and other chains have rolled out deals for the past 2 years, helping bring some customers back, but not in droves. Taco Bell has also pushed value offerings, but has been able to draw diners and lift sales with Lux boxes, sold across a broad price range at $5, $7, and $9. The chain reported a 6.5% increase in U.S. sales last year, compared with fast food's average of 2.4%, according to market research firm Technomic. Taco Bell has largely exceeded the fast food sector's performance for a decade, the firm said. Led by former Nike marketing executive Sean Tresvant, Taco Bell has also cultivated its cool factor. At its Live Más Live event in March, Taco Bell televised its 2026 menu launch event at the Palladium in Hollywood, with rappers Vince Staples and Doja Cat toasting over new refrescas and a flaming hot mini taco salad. Brands that break through speak to somebody specifically, and who we speak to is somebody we call the cultural rebel, Tresvant said during an interview last year. McDonald's, Chipotle, and other restaurant giants have also faced fast food crises and have had to toil to regain customers' trust in business. After federal authorities said that slivered onions served on McDonald's Quarter Pounders were likely the source of an E. coli outbreak that sickened dozens in 2024, the burger chain's U.S. same-store sales slumped for some 6 months. In late 2006, Taco Bell also struggled with an E. coli outbreak. Its United States same-store sales dropped the following year, and it took around 9 months for the chain sales to stabilize. Brands seeking to recover from a food safety crisis often roll out buzzy menu items or new deals. The return of McDonald's Snack Wrap, along with more value deals, helped the burger chain sales rebound. In 2007, Taco Bell heavily advertised new products such as the Cheesy Beefy Melt, its value menus, and a Major League Baseball promotion awarding free tacos. The chain was able to stabilize its sales by the end of the year. Wall Street analysts have said they expect the outbreak to measurably depress Taco Bell's U.S. sales in the short term. Reclaiming its cool factor could take more time. Downsize, no thanks. Boomers buy bigger homes. Angela and Victor Martino raised their 2 daughters decades ago in a ranch house measuring less than 2,000 square feet. The empty nesters recently bought the 5,000 square foot house next door. After a year-long renovation, the Denair, California home has a huge kitchen with space for the commercial meat slicer that Victor uses to cut a leg of prosciutto at family events. There is a playroom with polished concrete floors meant to withstand damage from their 7 grandchildren. The primary bathroom tub has features to help them get in and out more easily as they get older. We'll downsize when they plant me 6 feet into the ground, Victor, 64, said. Well-off boomers are increasingly upsizing their homes as they age, either buying bigger ones or financing additions to their existing properties. They are building guest houses for family members and gourmet kitchens for entertaining, alongside such features as high-end grab bars and first-floor primary bedrooms for aging in place. In the process, they are rewriting the rules of retirement and aging, when people are expected to move into smaller homes to save money. Boomers make up the largest share of homebuyers in the United States, an aspect of a housing market that is out of reach for younger buyers, but well within the economic powers of an older generation that controls the bulk of the nation's wealth. Downsizers account for a slightly larger share of older home buyers, but the upsizers are quickly gaining momentum. About 7% of buyers ages 61 to 70 said the main reason they chose their new home was because they wanted more space, up from 4% for that age group in 2016, according to the National Association of Realtors. The practice is even more common among affluent people. This generation's considerable wealth is making upsizing possible. Baby boomers and those who are older hold around $110 trillion in total wealth, far more than younger people. Many bought homes and stocks decades ago and have benefited from the appreciation of those assets. This year, 8 of the clients of Merrill Lynch financial advisor April Tardif retired. Every single one of them upsized. Only one client in the past 5 years has downsized. The historic retirement play of sell your home and buy a smaller one just isn't happening, Tardif said. Boomers already own a lot of the country's large homes. Empty nest baby boomers owned 28% of United States homes with 3 bedrooms or more in 2024, compared with 16% for millennials with children, according to Redfin. The new demand for even bigger properties is another way boomers dominate the housing market. They account for about 42% of home buyers, the largest share of any generation, according to the National Association of Realtors. Boomers hope to live active lives into their 90s and want to spend freely on hosting family and friends. They have a few qualms about giving to their children in the form of a spare bedroom or 3 of their own. Wendy Glaister, an interior designer who worked on the Martino's home, noticed her empty nest clients starting to upsize after the COVID-19 pandemic. Lockdowns made them appreciate time with loved ones, and the spread of remote work made it possible for adult children to visit for longer stretches. The bull run in stocks and big increases in home prices didn't hurt either. Couples now see their late-in-life residences as their dream homes. It is a celebration of their life and achievements and being able to invest in themselves, Glaister said. The upsized homes are often designed with family in mind. Sometimes, homeowners are accommodating adult children who still live with them or are making room for their own elderly parents. Often, they are building beautiful guest quarters for their families to visit. The Martinos, who own a farm and dried fruit business, host Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthday parties for their 2 adult daughters and grandchildren. The grandkids, ages 1 to 14, stay over when their parents are away. Victor and I are both high on life, Angela, 63, said. Other empty nesters are using the opportunity to buy bigger homes near children and grandchildren, or relocate to a dream location with hopes of luring friends and family to visit. Ed and Mary Smith's 3 adult kids all settled in the Boston area, and roughly 5-hour drive from the couple's home in suburban New Jersey. It was tough for the kids to make the trip regularly. So in 2022, the couple bought a 4,000 square foot home in Falmouth, Massachusetts, about 500 square feet bigger than the house they left. The Smiths have a primary bedroom suite on the first floor. The second floor is for their kids and 6 grandchildren when they come to visit, which they do often. We live in a place they want to come to, said Ed Smith, an 81-year-old retired partner at an accounting firm. That's a big draw. Advisors used to work in the windfall from downsizing and lower housing costs into clients' financial plans. Now, they have to help their clients to afford the home of their dreams, said Tardif, the financial advisor, who is based in Portland, Maine. Sometimes that means telling them they have to work longer than they planned. Other factors keep boomers from downsizing. Many want to avoid paying large capital gains taxes on the sale of a long held home that has appreciated a lot in value. Others are finding the housing stock of smaller homes is minimal and relatively expensive. Older people who are upsizing are opting for features that they hope will help them age comfortably in their big homes. Said Samara Goodman, an interior designer based in the Washington, D.C. area. They are building bathrooms with high-end grab bars that match the finishes of the other fixtures. Kit Stoles and Valerie Leavitt moved into their home in a rural area outside Ojai, California in 1991 with 2 young daughters. 4 years ago, they spent $200,000 converting a backyard office into an accessory dwelling unit for their children, now 41 and 36, visiting. Their younger daughter and her husband stayed in the unit when their first baby was born in 2024. Stoles and Levitt, who are 71 and 75, would go over and rock the baby for a few hours to give them a break. It was a great experience, Stoles said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Roller coaster week vexes Trump allies. Washington. It was an address that many Republicans and even some of President Trump's own advisors didn't want him to make. But 18 months into his second term, the president has little interest in hearing the word no. Thursday night's roughly 25-minute primetime address, in which Trump tried to raise doubts about the integrity of the United States election system, was the latest in a string of decisions, at home and abroad, that have baffled and frustrated senior members of Trump's own party, according to people familiar with the matter. Some in the GOP worry the president isn't focused enough on the economic issues that voters say they care about most, not to mention his war in Iran that shows no sign of letting up, ahead of an election in which Republicans are at risk of losing their majorities in Congress. White House officials said Trump's focus on elections doesn't mean he is ignoring economic issues. They noted that he has taken steps to ease costs for Americans and talks about the economy in many of his speeches and social media posts. But the people familiar with the matter said Trump, a Republican, has brushed aside advice from allies to give up on relitigating the 2020 election and focus on the future. Instead, the president has empowered loyalists who have reinforced his instincts, minimizing the influence of the moderating voices in his inner circle. That dynamic was on display Thursday night. Watching from the sidelines of Trump's speech were 2 men that the president has given far-reaching authority to investigate allegations of election fraud. Bill Pult, the acting director of national intelligence, and John Solomon, a conservative journalist working at the White House in a temporary role. Pult, who also serves as Trump's housing chief and has little national security experience, arrived at the office of the Director of National Intelligence with a mandate from Trump to fire staff and release classified documents related to election interference. In recent weeks, Pult and his team have briefed the president on their findings. The discussions have captured Trump's attention, triggering his interest in delivering the address. In the run-up to the speech, some of the president's advisors cautioned against the releasing intelligence that had been reviewed and largely discounted by officials during Trump's first term, some of the people said. But the president was eager to get the information out to pressure Congress to pass legislation that would, among other things, restrict mail-in ballots, The speech capped a whirlwind week for the president, defined by a pair of high profile policy U turns and a focus on issues that some Republicans think will do little to help the party in the midterms. When moms and dads lie down to sleep at night and can't, what they're mostly worried about, I would say, is cost of living. That's what I believe. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, said this past week. But he's the president, and he was elected by the people, and he can talk about whatever he wants. In a statement, White House spokesman Davis Ingle said Trump had a successful week, pointing to data showing that inflation slowed last month and that illegal crossings at the United States-Mexico border were low. The president's primetime address capped off the week with historic transparency on an issue tens of millions of voters care about, calling for bold, swift, and decisive action to protect the integrity of America's elections, Ingle said. The week began with the death of Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, the president's closest ally in the Senate and a vocal advocate for his election legislation, known as the Save America Act. Senate Republican leadership had already made clear they didn't have the votes to pass that legislation, but Trump had hoped allies such as Graham could push it through. On Monday, Trump surprised foreign allies and some members of his own administration when he said the United States would charge a 20% fee for commercial ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Administration officials rushed to figure out how a toll on an international waterway would be implemented and which agency would collect the fee, according to people familiar with the matter. One day later, after fielding calls from Gulf nations, Trump reversed course. Many Republican lawmakers and White House aides are eager to wind down the months-old war, worrying that continued high prices triggered by a resurgence in fighting could mean deeper political losses in November. But the conflict shows no sign of ending soon. The president's change of heart on the strait wasn't his only policy reversal. Trump was caught off guard when he learned about a decision by Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen to halt most vehicle stops by federal immigration officials following the fatal shootings of 2 immigrants by immigration and customs enforcement agents in the span of a week, according to people familiar with his thinking. The president wasn't briefed on the decision, and he felt the decision made him look weak, the people said. On Wednesday, Trump reversed Mullen's decision. But it was Trump's Thursday night address that got the most attention in Washington. The president's allies argued that his focus on election integrity is a way to excite his conservative base. They noted that Republican voters broadly support voter ID laws. One person close to the White House described it as a Hail Mary for Trump, who is loath to admit he lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden and who needs to drive out his supporters as the party faces headwinds with disapproval of the Iran war and economy. Other Republicans said they were growing wary of Trump's focus on the issue. It's like it's a really good show, Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, said, but you've watched the reruns too many times. U.S. tech shares sink on China AI advances. Investors fret over the sustainability of heavy spending. China's moonshot. The surprise release of a breakthrough artificial intelligence model from China intensified a sell-off in chip stocks Friday, fueling concerns about competition in AI and corporate spending that underpins its build-out. The anxiety pushed the PHLX Semiconductor Index, packed with industry heavyweights such as NVIDIA, Broadcom, and Micron Technology, into bear market territory. The index sank 10% this week, its steepest weekly drop since April of 2025. A bear market is defined by a drop of 20% or more from a recent peak. Tech stocks led a Friday sell-off that late afternoon had brought in to envelop 10 of 11 sectors in the S&P 500 index. The benchmark fell 1%, with only energy stocks up on the day, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite slid 1.4%. The latest trigger was China's Moonshot AI, which unveiled its Kimi K3 large language model Friday. The Beijing-based startup said the model outperforms some U.S. systems, stoking what some analysts called DeepSeek 2.0 concerns, a nod to the rival Chinese AI startup that upended global markets last year. This is concerning. David Sachs, co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, wrote on social media about Moonshot. Kimi K3 made its debut as the world's largest open-source model, according to the company, and topped some well-known United States counterparts, including Anthropic's Opus 4.8 and OpenAI's GPT 5.5 at certain coding benchmarks. Shortly after the Kimi K3 release, Chinese leader Xi Jinping endorsed the building of open-source artificial intelligence models, touting an approach that has helped the country catch up with the United States. Speaking Friday at an AI conference in Shanghai, Xi cast China as a champion of openness and equality, implicitly criticizing United States moves to protect its lead in AI semiconductors and models. We should oppose overstretching the concept of national security in the field of AI, or placing one country's security over that of others, Xi said, without naming the United States. Coding capabilities are regarded as a benchmark for model performance, because they enable many AI systems to take over computer use or autonomously complete long-running tasks. So-called open-weight models like Kimi K3 are free to download for users, who can customize them using company-specific data and reduce their costs significantly. The rise of cheaper, customizable models threatens frontier model makers like Anthropic and OpenAI, whose demand for computing resources underpins a sizable amount of capital spending that has helped power the United States economy. As OpenAI models begin to rival those of top AI startups producing proprietary systems, many U.S. companies are turning to cheaper options to rein in AI costs. NVIDIA, France's Mistral AI, and other U.S. and European companies have also started developing open-weight models. Investors have been dumping chip stocks in recent weeks as skepticism over whether AI business growth can justify the sector's lofty valuations grew. Friday's news from China effectively forced a rapid unwinding of crowded tech positions beyond just chip stocks, said Mark Hackett, chief market strategist for Nationwide. Whether it's retail or institutions, we've got extended pretty significantly in the We've gotten extended pretty significantly in the momentum-oriented technology space, Hackett said. This somewhat unhealthy combination of record-leveraged ETFs, record margin use, and record call option buying from retail investors. That was all concentrated in that momentum tech space, and we are just seeing that group moving on. On Friday, shares in Netflix fell 7.3% after the streaming company forecast its weakest revenue growth in years. Meanwhile, SpaceX, Elon Musk's rocket company, dropped 5.4% after it aborted a test launch of its Starship rocket on Thursday, capping off a stretch where tech investors have erased more than $1 trillion of its market value in about a month. The Dow Jones Industrial Average shed 0.8% on Friday, or 407 points. For the week, the Nasdaq led the losses with a 2.9% decline. The S&P slid 1.6%, and the Dow was 0.9% lower. Some investors attribute the recent volatility in chip stocks to traders locking in profits ahead of coming earnings from major chip makers and the Magnificent Seven group of companies. The tech sector is expected to report robust earnings growth, but the real focus for investors is whether mega-cap tech companies are plowing ever greater sums into AI investments. It's natural for investors to want to pull back a little bit in advance of earnings releasings, said Carol Schleif, Chief Market Strategist at BMO Wealth Management. And it's not unusual for investors to be fearful after the kind of run that AI stocks have had over the last 12 months. Chip stocks are also facing pressure from a broader rotation trade. Investors have been shifting capital out of AI-linked tech stocks and into sectors like energy, financials, industrials, and healthcare. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Office conversions get a reality check. Trouble at big project draws scrutiny to apartment development boom. In the late 1990s, a young Nathan Berman walked into a faded brick office building in Manhattan's financial district and saw the future. Within 2 years, he had transformed the 1920s-era Tyler building into 111 modern apartments. Berman was at the leading edge of what he has turned into a real estate boom. Banks and brokerage firms were abandoning older office buildings, and New York and other cities were growing desperate for new housing as rents soared. Converting offices into apartments was a financial and political winner. Berman and his company, Metroloft, went all in. Over time, the projects got bigger and more complicated. He wasn't just turning office nooks into kitchenettes, or making cubicle spaces into home offices. He began making buildings bigger, hollowing out their cores to bring in air and natural light, adding bunches of floors and drawing up plans for new swimming pools. He's gone from 100 units to 200 units to 400 units to now it's 800, 1200, who the heck knows, said Andrew Heiberger, whose brokerage, City Habitats, marketed many of Berman's early conversions. Last week's construction disaster at Berman's most ambitious project to date, turning the former Pfizer headquarters in Midtown Manhattan into 1,600 new apartments, is raising questions about what can go wrong in complex conversions. And with Manhattan's apartment vacancy rate below 2%, city officials have decided whether to hit the brakes on the wave of projects now underway. The troubled Pfizer headquarters project, the largest office to residential conversion in the country, ground to a halt after 2 structural columns buckled under the weight of newly added floor space, shutting down blocks of Midtown. It is being investigated by the city, and work is likely to be delayed for months. A spokesman for Metroloft said, "We continue to work closely with the Department of Buildings, and our focus remains on ensuring the site remains safe and that we can complete the repair work necessary to move forward with the successful completion of the project." Berman has said the weight of newly added floor space exceeded what 2 existing steel columns could support, causing them to buckle, and that those columns might not have been adequately reinforced. The episode, he said, should be viewed as a construction problem that has zero to do with a conversion. When developers carve out the center of former office buildings to increase air and light, zoning rules often allow them to add that lost square footage on the top of the building. They've been going bigger and bigger on these overbuilds, said Heiberger, so they're pushing the limits with the engineers and the architects. In New York, momentum behind gargantuan housing projects accelerated in the development-friendly administration of Mayor Eric Adams, who served from 2022 to 2025. His City of Yes set of zoning reforms allowed developers to build more housing density on individual sites, increase the number of buildings eligible for official to residential conversions, and removed parking mandates. With the election of Mayor Zoran Mamdani, residential conversions looked like one of the few areas of agreement between the city's business sector and the mayor's left-leaning political supporters. Even as the city moves ahead with an investigation, officials continue to express support for creating housing through conversion. Office to residential conversions have safely and successfully created thousands of new homes across the country, said Virginia Maloney, a city council member representing the district where the Pfizer building is located. Still, the conversion process is getting a closer look than ever before. This week, the Department of Buildings said inspectors are conducting safety probes into other construction sites. Those include projects involving Berman's firm and the private building inspector that worked on the Pfizer project, Damani Inspection Services, according to a person familiar with the matter. The incentives to expand vertically are clear. With New York City rents at record highs, the more units a developer can add, the more profitable a project becomes, especially because upper floor apartments with skyline views can command higher rents. Metroloft tacked on 10 stories when it turned 25 Water Street, with its 1,320 units finished last year, into the nation's largest office-to-residential conversion. Berman was set to break his own record with the former Pfizer headquarters, a two-building complex in Midtown Manhattan. Metroloft had added 19 floors to the smaller 10-story building, the 2 stories to the larger tower, the one in which 2 columns buckled on the 21st floor. It also had been horizontally expanded 16 floors in the taller one. Engineers say building expansions are common and can be done safely. Still, adding floors to a structure that wasn't originally built to hold such weight requires complex engineering. The careful sequencing of construction phases and considerable investment in inspecting the existing structure. If calculations are wrong, or assumptions about the previous construction are mistaken, floors might be added before columns are properly reinforced, and structures could fail. Doing this on an existing building is much more complicated than doing it on a new building, said Roberto Leone, a civil engineering professor at Virginia Tech. It's a very complicated process. I would not say it's something that your average engineer should take on. It is not impossible. It takes great care to do this. The crisis at the Pfizer building presents a new challenge for the office to residential conversion market. On the more complicated sort of build-ons, when they're really expanding the building. If I were on the investment committee, I'd say, let's double, triple, and quadruple check the calculations to make sure we don't have a recurrence, said real estate lawyer Jay Neveloff. Speed is one of the conversion industry's biggest selling points, allowing developers to deliver apartments years faster than ground-up construction because much of a building structure already exists. Investigators will have to determine whether increasingly ambitious projects like the former Pfizer building can be completed on those rapid timetables without compromising safety. Developers of other conversions spent much of last week reassuring anxious lenders and investors that their own projects won't face similar risks. We've had a lot of investors and lenders reach out and say, "Can you just remind us how we can be sure that this isn't going to happen to us?" said Michael Pestronk, a converter of office buildings in the Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. To reassure them, he sent photographs showing the extensive structural reinforcements underway, along with an explanation of the engineering review process. "We have 3 sets of belts and suspenders," Pestronk said. Berman, 66 years old, has become the nation's leading office-to-residential conversion developer after launching more than a dozen projects and creating thousands of new housing units. He had a hard-scrabble childhood in the Soviet Union. His father, a Holocaust survivor who was a tailor in what is now Western Ukraine, showed his young son how to fit clothing patterns together on bolts of fabric like pieces of a puzzle, leaving no material to waste. "Every inch counted," he said. Berman brought that same eye to figuring out how to fit as many apartments as possible onto each floor of aging Manhattan office buildings. He's very creative at figuring out the most efficient layouts with a building that people would otherwise look at and say, "This is not feasible to convert," said New York developer Marty Berger, who has worked with Berman on conversion projects. Not every project went smoothly. Metroloft has been sued by condominium owners at 443 Greenwich, a luxury Tribeca warehouse conversion that attracted A-list celebrities, including actors Jake Gyllenhaal and Meg Ryan. The owners allege construction defects that led to life-threatening conditions. The lawsuit said that the building's walls had loose bricks and leaks, and on the penthouse level, the roof and walls were literally falling apart. Metroloft has denied the allegations. Until the COVID-19 pandemic, office-to-residential conversions had largely been a New York phenomenon, with only a handful of projects elsewhere in the country. That is because most office buildings didn't make economic sense to convert. Their oversized floors made it too costly to redesign them into apartments with adequate light and air. During the pandemic, office demand collapsed as workers stayed home. Then, even after the health crisis was over, many companies permanently embraced hybrid workplace strategies that reduced their need for office space. That mattered for converters. Falling rents and rising vacancies drove down the prices of struggling office buildings. In some cities, urban office values fell as much as 90%. Suddenly, developers could afford to perform extensive surgery on office buildings, such as carving light courts through the middle or removing large sections of floor space to bring light and air to apartments. New conversion projects mushroomed. Apartment search website Rent Cafe said there were 90,300 units in the office-to-apartment pipeline nationwide at the beginning of the year. Owners of struggling office buildings sought out Berman and other conversion specialists, hoping they could salvage their properties. Lenders and institutional investors, who once viewed conversions as a niche strategy, began committing far more capital to the sector. Metroloft has received financing from big institutions such as J.P. Morgan Chase and the investment firm Apollo. The involvement of big names in the conversion business gives somebody like Nathan Berman more credibility to go get construction financing, said Neveloff, the lawyer. Over 3 decades, Berman has completed more than a dozen office-to-residential conversions, totaling over 8,000 apartments. as Lower Manhattan has evolved into a thriving residential neighborhood. Those projects have generated growing profits for Berman and his investors, allowing him to pursue even larger and more ambitious endeavors. The incident of the old Pfizer building could lead to new obstacles. I have a feeling that that problem is going to create a whole new set of regulations and rules, said Herb Heiberger, who helped market Berman projects. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. It was supposed to be Lamine Yamal's World Cup. Spain is still waiting. This has been a World Cup defined by superstars. All summer, the biggest names in the sport have not only come to America and scored bucket loads of goals, they have completely taken over matches. There was the Erling Haaland game, when Norway's ponytailed striker bludgeoned Brazil out of the tournament. There was the Jude Bellingham game, when his 2 goals for England silenced 80,000 fans in the Estadio Azteca. There was the Kylian Mbappe game, in which the France forward carved open Sweden's defense at will. In fairness to Sweden, Mbappe also did this against Senegal, Iraq, and Morocco. But as the final kicks off on Sunday against Lionel Messi and Argentina, the tournament, along with the entirety of Spain, is still waiting for the Lamine Yamal game. The teen prodigy from Barcelona came into his World Cup expecting to sweep America as the most successful Spanish import since the Macarena. He was at the heart of an Adidas campaign with Timothée Chalamet and featured on a giant 400-foot billboard for Powerade that looms over the Atlanta Stadium. Instead, his all-conquering road trip has been stuck in neutral. Yamal, who turned 19 on July 13th, has just 1 goal in 7 games. 2 years since his breakout at Euro 2024, where he embarrassed defenders for fun and still finished his homework on the side, the country's youngest showstopper has gone oddly quiet. His biggest contribution came in Tuesday's semi-final against France when he won a controversial penalty in the 22nd minute. "As long as we win the World Cup," Yamal said ahead of that game, "I think no one here will complain about me not scoring goals." Still, they don't build 400-foot billboards for guys who just pass the ball sideways. Yamal had racked up 24 goals and 17 assists in his 45 appearances for Barcelona last season. There was no reason to expect his form to dry up the moment he boarded a flight across the Atlantic. But at this World Cup, he has encountered the harsh reality of his second major tournament. 2 years ago, he was an explosive surprise. Now, he's the young player that opponents have spent 2 years finding solutions for. And Yamal hasn't found the net since Spain thumped Saudi Arabia 4-0 in its second game. I think he needs to calm down a bit, that anxiety that sometimes he has to prove himself, said Spain midfielder Rodri ahead of the semi-final. He's a very important player for us, and he's a very intelligent guy. But he's 19 years old, and we have to calm him down at certain moments of the game. Yamal isn't the first teenager to hit a speed bump after taking the fast track into his national team. Michael Owen burst onto the scene as an 18-year-old at the 1998 World Cup, but managed just a single goal at his next major tournament, when England crashed out in the group stage at Euro 2000. U.S. fans may remember Julian Green, who made history when he scored with his first touch at the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, becoming the national team's youngest goal scorer at 19 years old. Unfortunately, Green never notched another one at a major international tournament again. No one on La Roja is worried about Yamal going the same way yet, but some of his underlying numbers have been a cause for concern. The kid, known for his electric speed, ranks only 9th in total sprints on his own team, and his average speed has been below his teammate Aymeric Laporte, even though Laporte is a central defender. Those are some way short of Yamal's best, but they also far exceed his expected output when he suffered a severe hamstring injury in April and briefly looked doomed to miss the tournament entirely. He recovered swiftly enough to feature in every game here, but has been forced to work his way back to full fitness while being aggressively man-marked by every opponent he faces. Which isn't to say that La Roja is growing impatient. Spain has only to look at the one metric that shows his importance even more than goals and assists. Since Yamal's national team debut, it hasn't lost a single one of its 27 matches with him in the lineup. Maybe people think he's expected to score 3 goals in every match, midfielder Alex Baena said. I think he's delivering a fantastic tournament. Oregon is pumping children full of hormones. If you live in Oregon and your child is confused about her sex, the state is ready to medicate her and perhaps even put her under the knife. The Beaver State has become a national leader in providing life-altering hormones to minors. According to a new study published in Research Connections, at age 17, roughly 1 in every 240 girls and 1 in every 630 boys in Oregon received cross-sex hormones for gender dysphoria between 2016 and 2023. These figures are triple and double the national average for girls and boys, respectively. For younger children, the disparity is even greater. Cross-sex hormone use in the study was 4 to 5 times the national rate among 14 and 15-year-olds, and puberty blocker use was more than 5 times the national rate at age 14. Oregon classifies hormones and surgery as medically necessary treatments for gender dysphoria, which the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders defines as a mismatch between one's sex and one's subjective perception of gender, accompanied by distress or difficulty functioning. According to the study, teens in Oregon are being diagnosed with gender dysmorphia at alarming rates. 1.51% of girls and 0.46% of boys received a transgender-related diagnosis, almost always gender dysphoria, between 2016 and 2023. The figure for both sexes is 0.98%, 10 times the prevalence of type 2 diabetes in this age group, and only slightly lower than the share of teens who describe themselves as transgender on state surveys in those years, 1.18%. In Oregon, calling oneself transgender is a fast track to medical diagnosis, drugs, and in some cases, even surgery. About 1 in 4 diagnosed minors in Oregon received such interventions, the study finds. Gender transition involves the disruption of an adolescent's natural hormone production and regulation. The goal is to mimic the appearance of the opposite sex or attain a sexually ambiguous appearance, all at the expense of the body's healthy functioning. The known and suspected harms of these interventions include infertility, sexual dysfunction, cognitive impairment, cardiovascular disease, bone health problems, and cancer. Health authorities in several European countries have banned or restricted access to hormonal interventions for minors following rigorous evidence reviews. In Oregon, the trend has been one of reckless acceleration. The apparent ease with which distressed Oregon teens go from transgender identification to diagnosis and dangerous medical intervention is no accident. It flows from deliberate choices made by state health authorities a decade ago. Oregon is the only United States state that has formally adopted the medical recommendations, called Standards of Care, of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH. That 2014 decision has spillover effects for commercial insurance. In 2023, Oregon updated its Medicaid policies to incorporate WPATH's eighth and latest standards of care, known as SOC 8. WPATH has been in critics' crosshairs for years, but in 2024, controversy reached a crescendo as internal WPATH communications obtained by the Alabama Attorney General while defending a lawsuit against the state's limits on so-called gender-affirming care for minors revealed evidence of medical scandal. These documents showed that when developing SOC 8, WPATH commissioned evidence reviews, but it suppressed them after finding little or no evidence about children and adolescents. It then claimed that a systematic review of evidence was not possible. WPATH also initially recommended age minimums for nearly all gender transition procedures, enlisted almost exclusively authors with financial or other conflicts of interest, and sprinkled medical necessity statements to guarantee insurance coverage for procedures despite acknowledging privately in an email that all of us are painfully aware that there are many gaps in research to back up our recommendations. Last month, the Federal Trade Commission sued WPATH, alleging consumer fraud via unfair or deceptive practices. WPATH called the lawsuit baseless, disputed the FTC's jurisdiction, and said its activities are protected under the First Amendment. In Oregon, where WPATH's influence has been institutionalized, thousands of teens have already been exposed to life-altering drugs and surgery. Authorities likely believed they were responding to demand, but the number suggests they were creating it. Some objecting parents face child welfare investigations. When the state first approved Medicaid coverage for gender transition procedures in 2015, officials projected that only about 175 people, adults and minors combined, would use the services each year, with costs not exceeding $200,000. In the first year alone, costs exceeded $720,000. By 2024, the figure had risen to more than $12.3 million, over 60 times the original projection. The number of Oregonians receiving covered procedures was roughly 10 times the anticipated number in 2015 and 80 times by 2023. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Saturday/Sunday, July 18th and 19th, 2026 issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Julian Wong. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability